What is the true price of integrity? For Margaret Evans, a 24-year-old waitress, drowning in debt, the price was her job, her security, and her last shred of hope. In one moment, she chose to defend a silent elderly janitor from the vicious tirade of a wealthy customer. It was a simple act of kindness that got her fired and thrown out onto the cold city streets. But what she didn't know was that the janitor she defended was not who he seemed. He was guarding a secret worth billions, and her single act of compassion was about to unravel everything she thought she knew about power, wealth, and the hidden value of a human heart. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Located in the heart of downtown Manhattan, it was a stage where the city's elite performed their nightly ritual of casual opulence. The air, thick with the scent of truffle oil and expensive perfume, hummed with the low murmur of stock market victories and Hampton's gossip. For the staff, it was a different kind of performance. Theirs was a ballet of silent servitude, choreographed by their manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose spine was made of jelly and whose smile was stapled on. Margaret Evans was one of the principal dancers in this nightly show, though she felt more like a stagehand. At 24, her life was a frantic scramble to stay afloat. An art school degree had left her with a mountain of debt and a portfolio of beautiful unseen canvases. Her real masterpiece was the delicate balancing act she performed daily, juggling rent for her tiny Brooklyn apartment, the ever-increasing cost of her mother's medication for multiple sclerosis, and the crushing weight of her own deferred dreams. Her uniform, a starched white shirt and a black apron, felt like a costume hiding the paint stains on her fingers and the exhaustion in her eyes. But she was good at her job. She could anticipate a request for more water from across the room, recite the specials with the convincing passion of a seasoned actress, and maintain a placid professional smile even when a customer was treating her like a piece of furniture. It was during these long shifts that she first noticed Andrew. Andrew was the evening janitor, a man who seemed to have faded into the background of the world. He was likely in his late 60s, with a face etched with the kind of deep lines that time carves into gentle souls. His hair was a wisp of silver white, and his movements were slow, deliberate, and quiet. He never spoke, unless spoken to, and even then his replies were soft murmurs his eyes often cast downwards. He was part of the restaurant's machinery, as essential and as invisible as the hum of the air conditioning. While servers buzzed around in a flurry of activity, Andrew would methodically sweep stray crumbs from the plush carpet polish, a smudge from a brass railing, or mop a spill with a quiet efficiency that was almost ghostly. Most of the staff ignored him. The customers certainly never saw him. But Margaret saw him. She saw the way his back stooped with a permanent ache as he lifted heavy trash bags. She saw the slight tremor in his hands as he wiped down the marble countertops at the end of the night. And she saw the profound loneliness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. She made a point to acknowledge him. A simple, "Good evening, Andrew," as she arrived for her shift. A "have a safe trip home" when she left long after midnight. Sometimes she'd save him a bread roll or a slice of cake that was destined for the trash. He would accept these small offerings with a nod and a rare, hesitant smile that briefly lifted the weariness from his face. It was a fleeting connection, a tiny spark of shared humanity in the cold, transactional world of the Gilded Spoon. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Margaret found Andrew in the back alley, sitting on an overturned milk crate, carefully eating the slice of tiramisu she had slipped him. The harsh alley light softened the hard lines of the city around them. "Tough night?" she asked, leaning against the brick wall. He looked up, startled, as if surprised to be addressed. "They're all tough in their own way." he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Tell me about it. Table 7 sent their steak back 3 times. Said it was breathing wrong," she said with an eye roll. A small chuckle escaped Andrew's lips, a dry, rustling sound. "I saw that. The gentleman with the shiny shoes." "And the even shinier ego," Margaret added. They fell into a comfortable silence. "You know, Andrew," she said after a moment, "I appreciate you. You keep this place running. You clean up the messes everyone else leaves behind. Nobody ever says thank you for that." Andrew stopped eating and looked at her, his gaze steady and surprisingly sharp. It was the first time he had ever made direct eye contact with her for more than a second. In his pale blue eyes, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, not just gratitude, but a deep, knowing intelligence. "Kindness costs nothing, Margaret," he said softly. "But it's the most valuable thing a person can spend. Don't ever forget that." He finished his cake, nodded his thanks, and shuffled back inside to finish his duties. Margaret stayed in the alley for another minute, the city's cacophony a dull roar around her. His words echoed in her mind. She had no idea that her small investment in kindness was about to be tested, and that its return would be beyond anything she could possibly imagine. Tuesday nights were notoriously unpredictable at the Gilded Spoon. They could be deathly quiet, or without warning, slammed by a wave of corporate dinners and last-minute reservations. This particular Tuesday, the storm arrived in the form of a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was not just a customer, he was an event. He strode into the restaurant like a conquering hero, his voice booming over the carefully curated ambience. He was in his late 40s with a tan that looked professionally applied, and a Rolex that gleamed under the recessed lighting. He was flanked by 2 younger men who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes and nodded a little too eagerly at his opinions. Margaret's heart sank when Mr. Henderson assigned her their table. "This is Marcus Thorne," Henderson whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. "He's a major real estate developer, potentially looking to book his company's 100-person holiday gala here. Whatever he wants, he gets." Understand Margaret understood perfectly. It meant an evening of feigned deference, of laughing at jokes that weren't funny, and of being treated as though her only purpose on earth was to refill his glass of ridiculously expensive Cabernet. The performance began. Thorne was condescending from the start. He snapped his fingers to get her attention. He sent back the first bottle of wine, claiming it was corked, though Margaret knew the sommelier had opened it perfectly. He interrogated her about the menu, questioning the origin of the scallops and the marbling of the Wagyu beef with the air of a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, leaning back in his chair and looking her up and down. "Just bring us the best of everything. Don't bore me with the details. I trust your pretty little face can remember that." His companion snickered. Margaret felt a hot flush of anger creep up her neck, but she crushed it down, replacing it with her professional smile. "Of course, sir. An excellent choice." Her mother's latest medical bill was sitting on her kitchen counter, a stark, white reminder of why she had to endure this. The potential for a huge tip from a table like this was the only thing that made it bearable. She could almost hear her mother's tired voice. "Just get through the night, honey. Don't make waves." The night wore on. The more wine Thorne consumed, the louder and more obnoxious he became. He complained about the temperature, the music, the other diners. His voice sliced through the sophisticated hum of the restaurant, drawing annoyed glances from other tables. It was during the main course that the incident happened. Andrew was making one of his silent rounds, his trash receptacle on a small cart rolling noiselessly behind him. He was discreetly picking up a fallen napkin near a neighboring table when Thorne, gesticulating wildly while telling a story, knocked his full glass of red wine over. The dark liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, pooling dangerously close to the edge. A few drops splattered onto the sleeve of Thorne's custom-tailored suit. Silence fell over their table. Thorne looked down at his sleeve as if he'd been shot. His face, already flushed with alcohol, turned a deep, blotchy red. His eyes darted around, searching for a target for his fury, and they landed on Andrew. Andrew had frozen a few feet away, the fallen napkin still in his hand. He was by pure chance the closest person to the spill. "You," Thorne roared, pointing a thick finger at the old janitor. "You clumsy old fool! Look what you did!" Andrew looked up, his expression one of pure confusion. "Sir, I didn't." "Don't lie to me," Thorne bellowed, getting to his feet. The entire restaurant was now watching. "You bumped my chair, your stupid little cart. This is $1,000 suit. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Of course you don't. $1,000 is probably what you make in a year." Margaret, who had been rushing over with a cloth, stopped dead in her tracks. She had seen the whole thing. Andrew was at least 5 feet away when the glass tipped. Thorne had knocked it over himself. "Sir," she began, her voice calm but firm. "It was an accident. You just gestured a bit." Thorne whirled on her. "Are you calling me a liar? Are you defending him?" He sneered, gesturing at Andrew with disgust. This cleaner, he shouldn't even be out here, amongst decent people. He should be in the back, scrubbing toilets where he belongs." The cruelty of the words, so casually and publicly delivered, struck Margaret like a physical blow. She looked at Andrew. His face had gone pale, his shoulders were slumped in humiliation, and he was staring at the floor, unable to meet the dozens of pairs of eyes now fixed on him. At that moment, he looked incredibly small and fragile. Something inside Margaret snapped. It was the exhaustion, the constant swallowing of pride, the memory of every entitled customer who had ever treated her as less than human. It was the image of her mother struggling with quiet dignity against her illness. And it was Andrew's simple words in the alley: kindness costs nothing, but it's the most valuable thing a person can spend. The potential tip, the holiday gala, Mr. Henderson's warning, it all evaporated. There was only this moment, this gross injustice, and the silent, humiliated old man who deserved to be defended. The air in the gilded spoon was now thick with a different kind of tension. The clinking of cutlery had ceased. Conversations had died down. Every diner, every staff member was a spectator to the drama unfolding at table 12. Mr. Henderson was already scurrying over his face, a mask of panic. He saw a major client, a huge potential contract, and a PR disaster, all rolled into one. His immediate goal was appeasement, and that meant finding a sacrificial lamb. "Mr. Thorne, sir, my deepest apologies." Henderson began, practically bowing. "Is everything all right? We will take care of the cleaning bill for your suit, of course. Anything you need." Thorne wasn't looking at Henderson. His glare was still fixed on Andrew, who seemed to be shrinking into the expensive carpet. "What's all right?" he scoffed. "Your decrepit staff is bumping into my guests and ruining my clothes. I want him fired. Now. In front of me." Henderson's eyes darted to Andrew, then back to Thorne. The calculation was swift and brutal. An elderly part-time janitor versus a real estate mogul. It wasn't a choice. "Andrew," Henderson said, his voice stripped of all warmth. "You are dismissed for the evening. We will discuss your employment tomorrow." It was a public execution of a man's dignity. Margaret felt a surge of righteous fury. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the tense silence like a shard of glass. Henderson, Thorne, and even Andrew looked at her. "What did you say?" Thorne sneered, turning his full attention to her. Margaret took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked directly into Marcus Thorne's eyes. "I said no. He didn't do anything. You knocked the glass over yourself, Mr. Thorne. I saw it. Everyone at this table saw it." She glanced at Thorne's two companions, who immediately looked down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their lobster tails. "This man," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she gestured toward Andrew, "was on the other side of the walkway. He didn't touch you or your chair. You were waving your arms around, and you spilled your own wine. And now you're trying to blame an innocent man and get him fired to save your own ego." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Mr. Henderson looked as if he was about to have a stroke. His face went from pale to a blotchy purple. "Margaret, that is enough!" he hissed, grabbing her arm. She shook him off. "No, it's not enough. You can't treat people this way. His name is Andrew. He's a human being. He works harder than anyone in this room, cleaning up messes he didn't make. He deserves respect, not this disgusting display of cruelty." Marcus Thorne stared at her, his mouth agape. He was a man who was never told no, a man whose wealth and power formed an impenetrable shield. To be challenged so publicly by a waitress was an insult of the highest order. His shock quickly morphed into rage. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" He sputtered, his voice trembling with fury. "You're a servant. Your job is to take my order and stay quiet. You have no right to speak to me like that. I have every right to tell the truth." Margaret retorted, her own voice, shaking now but not with fear, with conviction. "And the truth is, you are a bully, and you owe him an apology." That was the final straw. Thorne slammed his hand on the table, making the remaining glasses jump. "An apology. I'll see to it you never work in this city again. Henderson, are you going to let your little charity case here speak to me this way? I'm walking out of here, and I'm taking the Sterling Hospitality Gala with me. You can kiss that $500,000 contract goodbye." The threat hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Henderson's career. The manager's face crumpled. All pretense of control vanished. He turned on Margaret, his eyes filled with a desperate fury. "Evans, you're fired!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Get your things and get out. You are finished here." Margaret stared at him, the words hitting her with the force of a physical blow. Fired. Just like that. Her job, her income, the lifeline that paid for her mother's care, severed. A wave of nausea and panic washed over her. For a terrifying second, she wondered if she had made a catastrophic mistake. Then she looked over at Andrew. Throughout the entire exchange, he had remained silent. But now he lifted his head. He looked past the furious customer, past the panicked manager, and he looked directly at Margaret. His pale blue eyes were no longer downcast or humiliated. They were clear, and in their depths she saw an expression she would never forget, a profound and unmistakable look of respect. In that silent gaze, Margaret knew she had done the right thing. The cost was devastating, but her integrity was intact. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She untied the strings of her black apron, the symbol of her servitude, and laid it carefully on a nearby serving station. Without another word, she turned her back on Marcus Thorne, on Mr. Henderson, and on the silent watching restaurant, and walked toward the staff locker room. The silence that followed her was more deafening than any shout. The locker room felt like a tomb. The cheerful chatter and pre-shift gossip that usually filled the small space were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. Margaret's hands trembled as she pulled her street clothes from her locker. The adrenaline that had fueled her defiance was draining away, leaving behind a cold, creeping dread. Fired. The word echoed in her head. How was she going to pay rent next month? How was she going to afford the refill of her mother's prescription, the one that kept the worst of her symptoms at bay. Panic clawed at her throat, making it hard to breathe. She had stood on principle, but principle didn't pay the bills. Her co-workers trickled in one by one. They avoided her eyes, busying themselves with mundane tasks. Maria, a server she often shared shifts with, finally approached her. "Margaret, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes full of pity. "What you did, it was brave. He's a monster, Thorne." "Brave doesn't get me my job back," Margaret said, her voice hollow. "Henderson is a coward. He'll always side with the money." Margaret nodded, pulling on her worn-out jacket. It felt flimsy against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She slung her bag over her shoulder, a bag that now contained nothing but a useless art school sketchbook and a few dollars in tips from earlier in the evening. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. She walked out of the locker room and down the service corridor, a path she had walked 1,000 times before. But this time, it was a walk of shame, an exile from the only world that provided her a living. She just wanted to disappear into the anonymity of the New York night. As she reached the back alley door, a quiet voice stopped her. "Margaret." She turned. It was Andrew. He was standing in the shadows of the hallway, his cleaning cart parked beside him. He held his worn, flat cap in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. "Andrew," she said, managing a weak smile. "Are you okay? I'm so sorry if I made things worse for you." "Worse?" He shook his head slowly, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "You did more for me in those 2 minutes than anyone has done in a very long time. You stood up for an old man nobody sees. He had no right to treat you that way," she said, the fire returning to her voice. "No one does." "No," he agreed, his gaze serious. "They don't." He took a hesitant step closer. The alley light cast long shadows, making his face look older and more tired than ever. "What you did came at a great cost to you. I know that." Margaret just shrugged, a lump forming in her throat. "I'll figure something out. I always do." "Perhaps," Andrew said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But good deeds shouldn't go unrewarded, and foolish men shouldn't go unchecked." He reached into the pocket of his drab grey work pants and pulled something out. It wasn't a wallet, but a small, simple business card. It was old and worn, the corners softened with age. He held it out to her. Margaret looked at it, confused. The card was stark white, with elegant embossed lettering. It read, "Sterling Hospitality Group, Eleanor Vance, Executive Vice President, Sterling Tower, 57th and Park." There was a phone number and nothing else. No mention of Andrew. "I don't understand," she said, looking from the card to his face. "Who is Eleanor Vance?" "She's an old friend," Andrew said, avoiding her eyes. "She helps people who are in difficult situations. Go and see her tomorrow morning. Ask for her specifically. Tell her that Andrew sent you." Margaret was bewildered. How did a janitor know an executive vice president at what was clearly a massive corporation? Sterling Hospitality was a name she vaguely recognized, a global conglomerate that owned luxury hotels, resorts, and a handful of high-end restaurants, including, she was suddenly certain, the Gilded Spoon. "Andrew, I can't just walk into a place like that." "Yes, you can," he insisted, pressing the card into her hand. His fingers were calloused and rough, but his touch was gentle. "Just tell her my name. Andrew. She will understand." He seemed so certain, so earnest, that her skepticism began to waver. What did she have to lose? She had no job, no prospects, and a pile of bills waiting for her at home. A bizarre, long-shot lead from an elderly janitor was better than nothing at all. "Okay, Andrew," she said, her voice barely audible. "Okay, I'll go." "Good," he said, a look of profound relief washing over his features. He gave her a final small nod, then turned and disappeared back into the restaurant's service entrance, his cart rattling softly behind him. Margaret stood alone in the cold alley, the sounds of the city's nightlife a world away. She looked down at the crisp, important-looking card in her hand, then back at the door where the janitor had vanished. A man with no power had just given her a key to one of the most powerful corporations in the city. It made no sense. It felt like a dream, or perhaps the beginning of a cruel joke. Clutching the card tightly in her hand, she stepped out onto the street and began the long subway ride home, her mind a whirlwind of confusion, desperation, and a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. The next morning, the city felt different. The usual chaotic energy of Manhattan now seemed menacing a concrete jungle where she was hopelessly lost. The business card in her pocket felt both as heavy as an anchor and as flimsy as a lottery ticket. After a sleepless night spent staring at her ceiling, Margaret had decided to follow Andrew's strange instructions. Desperation was a powerful motivator. Dressed in the only professional-looking outfit she owned, a simple black blazer and slacks she'd bought for an art gallery interview years ago, she took the subway to Midtown. When she emerged from the station at 57th and Park, she had to crane her neck to see the top of the building before her. Sterling Tower was not just a skyscraper. It was a monument to wealth and power. A sleek pillar of smoked glass and steel, it seemed to pierce the clouds, reflecting the morning sun with an intimidating glare. Men in sharp suits and women in designer dresses flowed through its revolving doors with an air of effortless importance. Margaret felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She was a recently fired waitress with paint under her fingernails. She didn't belong here. This was a world away from the service alleys and staff locker rooms she knew. For a moment, she considered turning back, convinced this was a wild goose chase. But the image of Andrew's earnest face and the even more terrifying image of her mother's medical bills pushed her forward. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the revolving doors into the lobby. The interior was even more imposing than the outside. The floors were polished marble, the ceiling soared 3 stories high, and a massive abstract sculpture that probably cost more than her apartment building dominated the center of the room. The air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and success. She approached the reception desk, a long, intimidating slab of granite, manned by a woman with perfect hair and a headset. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone polite but brisk, her eyes scanning Margaret's simple attire with practiced efficiency. "Yes," Margaret said, her voice coming out a little shakier than she'd hoped. "I'm here to see Eleanor Vance." The receptionist's fingers danced across a keyboard. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't, but I was told to come see her. My name is Margaret Evans." She paused, feeling foolish. "Andrew sent me." The receptionist looked up from her screen, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Andrew? I don't have an Andrew in my directory. What's his last name?" I don't know," Margaret admitted, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "He just said to tell her Andrew sent me." The receptionist's polite mask tightened into one of suspicion. She was likely used to dealing with all sorts of people trying to get access to the building's powerful executives. "I'm sorry, Miss Evans, but Miss Vance's schedule is fully booked. She doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Perhaps you can call her assistant to schedule something." It was a polite but firm dismissal. The whole thing had been a mistake, a fantasy cooked up by a lonely old man. Dejection washed over Margaret. She was about to turn and leave to accept her fate when she decided to try one last time. "Please," she said, her voice low but insistent. Can you just tell her? Tell her it's about what happened last night at the Gilded Spoon, and that Andrew sent me. It's very important." The intensity in Margaret's voice, or perhaps the mention of one of their flagship restaurants, made the receptionist hesitate. With a sigh that clearly communicated her doubt, she picked up her phone. "Ms. Vance's office. Yes, this is the front desk. I have a Ms. Margaret Evans here." No appointment. She says it's regarding the Gilded Spoon, and that Andrew sent her. The receptionist listened, her eyebrows raising slightly. Yes, I see. Right away." She hung up the phone and looked at Margaret with a completely different expression, one of surprise and a newfound respect. "Miss Vance will be right down," she said, her tone now deferential. Margaret was stunned. It had actually worked. The name Andrew was a key, and it had just unlocked a very important door. A few moments later, an elevator door chimed open, and a woman in her late 50s strode out. She was the epitome of corporate power: impeccable grey suit, elegant silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and an air of no-nonsense authority. This had to be Eleanor Vance. Her sharp eyes scanned the lobby and landed on Margaret. "Ms. Evans?" "Yes," Margaret said, her voice small. "I'm Eleanor Vance. Please come with me." Eleanor didn't offer a handshake or a smile. She simply turned and led Margaret toward a private high-speed elevator at the back of the lobby. They rode up in silence. The floors whisked by in a digital blur. Margaret's ears popped as they ascended into the upper echelons of the city. They stepped out onto the top floor. The office was more like a sprawling penthouse apartment with panoramic views of Central Park. The furniture was minimalist and modern. The art on the walls was original and expensive, and the silence was absolute. "This way," Eleanor said, leading her toward a large set of oak doors. "He's waiting for you." Margaret asked, her confusion mounting. "I thought I was here to see you." Eleanor stopped and turned, and for the first time, her severe expression softened into something that looked like sympathy. "I am the Executive Vice President, Miss Evans. My job is to handle important matters for the company, and you today are a very important matter. But I am not the one you need to speak with. He wanted to see you himself." She pushed open the grand oak doors, revealing a vast corner office. The room was bathed in natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. A massive mahogany desk sat facing the breathtaking view. A man was standing with his back to them, looking out over the city. He was tall and wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit that spoke of immense wealth and power. "He will see you now," Eleanor said softly, and then she quietly closed the doors behind Margaret, leaving her alone with the stranger. The man turned around, slowly. Margaret's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart felt like it stopped. It was Andrew. But it wasn't Andrew. The stooped shoulders were gone, replaced by a straight, confident posture. The tired, weary expression was gone, replaced by a look of sharp intelligence and quiet authority. The janitor's drab grey uniform was gone, replaced by a suit that cost more than her car. His silver-white hair was neatly styled. The only thing that was the same were the eyes, the pale blue, knowing eyes that had looked at her with such respect in the restaurant. He offered a small, sad smile. "Hello, Margaret. Please have a seat. I believe we have much to discuss. My name is Alexander Sterling." Margaret didn't sit. She couldn't. Her legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the plush carpet of the Billionaire's office. She stared at the man before her, her mind struggling to reconcile the two images, the humble janitor, meticulously mopping a floor, and the powerful CEO, standing in a skyscraper, the master of this vast empire. Andrew. The name came out as a shocked whisper. It was my father's name. He said his voice, the same quiet, raspy tone she remembered, but now it held an undercurrent of command. Alexander Sterling is the name on the buildings. Andrew was the man who taught me the value of a hard day's work. He gestured again to one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. This time Margaret numbly obeyed, sinking into the soft cushions. She felt utterly out of her depth, a small boat caught in the wake of an ocean liner. "I imagine you have a lot of questions," Alexander Sterling said, rounding his desk but choosing to sit in the chair beside her rather than behind the imposing piece of furniture. It was a deliberate act meant to put her at ease. I don't understand," she stammered. Why were you working as a janitor at your own company?" A shadow of deep sadness passed over his face, making him look for a moment like the weary old man she had known. "My wife Isabel passed away a year ago." He began, his voice softening. "We built this company together from a single diner in Queens. She was the heart of it all. She knew every employee's name, their children's names, their struggles. She always said, 'A company isn't the name on the door, Alex. It's the people scrubbing the floors and washing the dishes.'" He paused, looking out the window at the sprawling city below. After she was gone, I felt disconnected. I was sitting in boardrooms looking at spreadsheets and profit margins, and I realized I didn't know the heart of my own company anymore. I had lost touch with what Isabel always held so dear, the people. He turned his gaze back to Margaret. So I decided to see it for myself. I created a new identity, Andrew Collins, a retiree looking for part-time work. No background checks for a janitorial position, especially when the CEO's office quietly approves the hire. For the past 6 months, I've been working in my own establishments. As a dishwasher in one of our hotels, a groundskeeper at a resort, and for the last 2 months, a janitor at the Gilded Spoon. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place in Margaret's mind. His silence, his observance, his quiet dignity. It had all been a performance, a disguise. What I saw, it wasn't all good. Alexander continued, his voice laced with disappointment. I saw managers who ruled by fear. I saw employees who were overworked and undervalued. I saw a focus on profit that had eclipsed the focus on people. I saw everything Isabel warned me against. I saw men like Mr. Henderson who would sacrifice a good employee's dignity for a wealthy customer's wallet. His eyes met hers and the sharpness was back. And then I saw you, Margaret. I saw you treat the invisible man with kindness day after day. You didn't know who I was. I was to you and everyone else just the old janitor. Yet you showed me a decency that I rarely saw from my own management. He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. Last night I saw something truly remarkable. I saw you risk everything, your job, your livelihood, to defend a person you believed was powerless. You stood up to a bully not for personal gain, but because it was the right thing to do. In that moment, you embodied the spirit of this company that I thought was lost. The spirit of Isabel. Margaret was speechless. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind, but now through a completely new lens. The confrontation, the firing, it hadn't just been a personal drama. It had been a test, and the CEO of the entire corporation had been the star witness. "So what happens now?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Now," Alexander Sterling said, a hint of steel entering his tone. "We begin to fix what is broken, and that starts with last night." He picked up a sleek phone from his desk and pressed a button. "Eleanor, could you come in, please, and bring the files?" Eleanor Vance entered a moment later, holding a thin folder. She handed it to Alexander and stood silently by the desk. "Mr. Marcus Thorne," Alexander said, opening the folder. "A man who believes his wealth gives him the right to abuse others. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Mr. Thorne has been permanently banned from all 312 Sterling hospitality properties worldwide. Furthermore, I made a personal call to the board of his company, of which I am a silent partner, to share a detailed account of his public behavior. I believe they will be having a serious discussion about the character of their CEO." Margaret's eyes widened. "As for Mr. Henderson," Alexander continued, closing the folder. "His employment with Sterling Hospitality was terminated an hour ago. We do not tolerate managers who prioritize appeasing abusive customers over protecting their own staff. That is not leadership. That is cowardice." He had dismantled the lives of the two men who had caused her so much grief with a few phone calls. The sheer scale of his power was dizzying. He then turned his full attention back to Margaret, his expression softening once more. "Which brings me to you, Margaret Evans. You were fired for demonstrating integrity, compassion, and courage. These are not fireable offenses at my company. On the contrary, they are the qualifications I value most." He stood up and walked over to his desk, picking up another thicker file. He opened it and turned it around for her to see. It was her portfolio. Photos of her canvases, her sketches, her art school transcripts. "I took the liberty of having Eleanor do some research on you this morning," he explained. "You're an artist, a very talented one from the looks of it." Margaret was too stunned to speak. "Margaret, I didn't bring you here just to apologize or to give you your old job back. An apron at the Gilded Spoon is no place for you. I am creating a new position within the Sterling Hospitality Group, and I want you to be the first to hold it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I want you to be our first ever Chief Culture Officer. Your job will be to travel to our properties, not as a waitress, but as my personal representative. You will observe, you will listen to the staff, and you will help us rebuild our corporate culture from the ground up based on the principle of respect for every single employee, from the dishwasher to the general manager. You will ensure that what happened last night never happens again." He named a salary that made Margaret's head spin. It was more than she had ever dreamed of making in a decade, let alone a year. "And," he added with a gentle smile, "the position comes with a signing bonus. We will pay off your student loans in full, and we are establishing the Isabel Sterling Grant for the Arts. You will be its first recipient with enough funding to pursue your painting without financial worry for the rest of your life." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, blurring the incredible view from the window. The crushing weight she had carried for years, the debt, the worry for her mother, the grief for her own lost dreams, was suddenly miraculously lifted. "Why?" She whispered the single word encompassing a universe of disbelief. "Why me?" Alexander Sterling came over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because my wife Isabel was an artist too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She had to give it up to help me build our business. She would have loved your work, and she would have loved what you did for that old janitor in the restaurant. You showed me that the heart of our company isn't dead. It was just waiting for someone brave enough to remind us what it looks like." The following weeks were a blur for Margaret, a surreal transition from a world of sticky tables and dwindling tips to one of corporate boardrooms and strategic planning. The first thing she did was call her mother, explaining that she had been fired and then hired as an executive for the same company in the span of 24 hours was a challenge. But the sound of her mother's tearful relief when Margaret told her that all her medical bills would be covered forever was the greatest reward she could have imagined. True to his word, Alexander Sterling, or Alex, as he insisted she call him, fast-tracked her into the company. Eleanor Vance, initially intimidating, became a mentor, guiding Margaret through the labyrinth of corporate structure with sharp, efficient advice. Margaret discovered she had a natural aptitude for the role. Her years as a waitress had made her an expert observer of people. She could read the subtle cues of an unhappy employee, the forced smile of a stressed manager, and the unspoken needs of a team. Her first official act as Chief Culture Officer was to visit the Gilded Spoon. She walked in, not through the back alley, but through the front door. The staff who had heard the whirlwind rumors stared at her in awe. Maria rushed up to hug her, tears in her eyes. Margaret made sure that the entire evening staff received a significant bonus paid for personally by Alex as an apology for the culture of fear Henderson had fostered. She then instituted her first company-wide policy, the Andrew Rule. It stipulated that any verified instance of a customer being abusive to a staff member would result in the customer being immediately and permanently banned from all Sterling properties. The policy sent a clear message through the entire corporation: we protect our own. The employees came first. But her work wasn't just about policies. It was about people. She spent her days talking to housekeepers, bellhops, line cooks, and, yes, janitors. She listened to their stories, their frustrations, and their ideas, and she acted on them, bringing their concerns directly to Alex, who listened with the attentiveness of a man rediscovering the soul of his own creation. The Isabel Sterling grant was a gift she held even closer to her heart. Alex had a state-of-the-art studio built for her, in a quiet corner of her new, spacious apartment, an apartment chosen specifically for its abundant natural light. For the first time since graduation, she could paint without the gnawing anxiety of financial ruin. Her canvases, once filled with muted colors and a sense of confinement, exploded with vibrant life. Her art became a reflection of her new reality, bold, hopeful, and full of possibility. One crisp autumn afternoon, several months into her new life, Alex visited her studio. He walked around studying her paintings in silence. He stopped in front of a large canvas, her latest work. It was a portrait, an old man with a kind, weary face and clear blue eyes, sitting on an overturned milk crate in a dark city alley, a gentle light illuminating him from an unseen source. "Andrew," Alex said, his voice soft. "I wanted to remember," Margaret said. "Not the billionaire, but the man who reminded me that kindness is a choice." Alex looked at her, his eyes glistening. Isabel would have called this your masterpiece, not because of the technique, but because of the truth in it. You didn't just see a janitor, Margaret. You saw a person. That's a gift, a rare and powerful one. He looked back at the painting. "Thank you," he said, and she knew he wasn't just thanking her for the portrait. He was thanking her for what she did that night, for waking him from his grief-stricken slumber and reminding him of the legacy he and his wife had set out to build. Margaret Evans had walked into the Gilded Spoon that fateful Tuesday as a waitress, a struggling artist trapped in a life she didn't choose. She had stood up for a janitor and lost her job, but in doing so, she had found her true calling. She wasn't just painting on canvases anymore. She was painting a new culture onto the vast canvas of a global corporation, one brush stroke of compassion and integrity at a time. And her life, once a sketch of desperation, had finally become a masterpiece of her own making. A year had passed. The seasons had turned, and with them, the very culture of Sterling Hospitality Group had begun a seismic shift. Margaret Evans now walked the halls of Sterling Tower, not as a bewildered guest, but as a respected leader. Her office adjacent to Alexander's was a space of warmth and purpose, one wall dominated by her vibrant canvases, the other by a large corkboard, filled with feedback notes, employee survey results, and photos of staff from hotels around the world. She had traded her waitress apron for tailored blazers, but she never forgot the weight of it, the exhaustion in her feet, or the sting of being treated as invisible. That memory was the fuel for her mission. One Tuesday afternoon, a day that once filled her with a specific kind of dread, she was reviewing incident reports from their flagship properties. It was a practice she'd implemented to monitor the real-world application of her new policies. Most were minor issues: supply chain delays, guest complaints about room service, but one file from the sterling Grand Chicago caught her attention. It was flagged as guest conduct violation, Andrew Rule invoked. Her heart beat a little faster. She opened the file. The report, written by the hotel's general manager Sarah Albright, detailed an incident from the previous weekend. It began with a young bellhop named Leo Martinez. He was 20, working 2 jobs to help support his mother and younger sister while taking night classes in graphic design. According to his file, he was a model employee, punctual, unfailingly polite, and known for going the extra mile. On Saturday, he had assisted a wealthy couple, the Abernathys, with their luggage. Mrs. Abernathy was dripping in diamonds and condescension, treating Leo with an icy disdain that was all too familiar to Margaret. An hour after they checked in, the front desk received a frantic call. Mrs. Abernathy was screaming that a diamond earring, a family heirloom, worth tens of thousands of dollars, was missing from her jewelry case. She claimed it was there when they arrived, and immediately accused Leo of stealing it. He was the only one who handled the bags. Mrs. Abernathy had shrieked at the manager Sarah Albright in the middle of the grand lobby. "That boy with his shifty eyes, I want him arrested, I want him fired, and I want my earring back." Reading the words, Margaret felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. It was the same script, just a different stage. A wealthy, powerful guest versus a young, vulnerable employee. Under the old regime, under a manager like Henderson, Leo's career would have been over in that instant. He would have been fired, possibly even escorted out by security, his reputation ruined without a shred of evidence. But Sarah Albright was a graduate of Margaret's new Dignity First leadership program. Her report detailed her actions with calm precision. First, she had pulled Leo aside, away from the prying eyes of the guests, and asked for his account, reassuring him that he had the company's full support until facts proved otherwise. Then she had returned to the lobby to face the irate couple. "Mrs. Abernathy." Sarah had stated her voice, projecting calm authority. "I understand your distress. However, our policy here at Sterling is one of trust and respect for our staff. Leo is one of our finest employees. We will not be firing him. Instead, we will be conducting a thorough investigation. Allow me a few moments to review the security footage from the lobby and the guest elevator." Mr. Abernathy had blustered, threatening lawsuits and bad press, but Sarah held her ground. She spent 15 minutes in the security office, meticulously reviewing the high-definition footage. And there it was. The video clearly showed Mrs. Abernathy turning her head sharply while speaking on her phone near the check-in desk. The earring, poorly clasped, fell from her ear and bounced unseen under the lip of the granite counter. A few minutes later, another guest, a woman on her way out of the hotel, spotted it, picked it up, and turned it in to a different concierge at the far end of the desk. Armed with the evidence, Sarah had the earring retrieved from the lost and found. She approached the Abernathys, who were still fuming. She presented the earring and calmly explained what the footage revealed. Mrs. Abernathy's face went from rage to pale, bloodless shock. There was no apology, no remorse, just the quiet fury of being proven wrong. Sarah's report concluded per company protocol 7B, the Andrew Rule. I informed the Abernethys that their false and malicious accusation against a member of our staff constituted a severe breach of our guest conduct policy. I explained that their reservation was being cancelled, their stay comped, and that they were now permanently banned from all Sterling hospitality properties. Mr. Abernethy protested, but we stood firm. I personally apologized to Leo Martinez for what he was put through and have awarded him a bonus for his professionalism under extreme duress. I cannot express how empowering it was to be able to defend my team without fear of repercussion. This is a new day for us. Margaret closed the file, a slow, wide smile spreading across her face. She leaned back in her chair, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude and pride. The echo of her stand in the Gilded Spoon had travelled hundreds of miles. The choice she had made in that one moment was now protecting a young man in Chicago, empowering a manager in her own right, and slowly, methodically changing the world she now inhabited. She looked across her office at her masterpiece, the painting of Andrew in the alley. The light in the painting seemed to glow a little brighter. She had done more than just honor his memory. She had turned it into a shield for the powerless and echo of kindness that now reverberated through countless marble halls. Margaret's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't defined by our job title or our bank account, but by the character we show when no one important is watching. She defended a janitor believing he was the most powerless person in the room, and in doing so, she spoke to the most powerful. Her journey from despair to a position of influence proves that integrity is the most valuable currency we possess. It shows us that one small act of courage and kindness can create ripples that change not just one life, but the culture of an entire organization. What would you have done in Margaret's position? It's easy to say, we'd do the right thing. But when your rent, your family's health, and your future are on the line, the choice becomes infinitely harder. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, or restored a little bit of your faith in humanity, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that prove that a good heart is the greatest asset of all. Thank you for listening.